This is a guy trying to help heal a child. I'm sleeping in a sleeping bag on the floor. I gave him the bed because he has a brother named Star.
For years, the world has been haunted by the unanswered questions surrounding the sudden and tragic death of Michael Jackson, the undisputed king of pop. His untimely demise on June 25, 2009, sent shockwaves through the globe. Fans wept, celebrities paid homage, and media channels played his greatest hits on repeat. Though official reports attributed his death to acute propofol intoxication administered by his personal physician, Conrad Murray, many believed there was far more to the story. Now, after more than a decade of swirling rumors, hushed conversations, and whispered theories, the mystery has finally been unraveled, and the truth is more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. What makes this revelation particularly earth-shattering isn't just the identity of those involved, but the sheer scale and intricacy of the circumstances that led to Jackson's final hours. As details have come to light, it is now apparent that Michael Jackson's death wasn't the simple result of one man's poor medical decisions. It was the chilling conclusion to a slow-burning orchestrated saga powered by fear, greed, and control. Jackson, it appears, had become more than just a pop star. He had evolved into a figure of such profound influence that those around him could no longer separate the man from the empire he represented. And when that empire became threatened, the man behind it found himself dangerously vulnerable. Emerging evidence now indicates that Jackson was not merely a victim of an overzealous doctor, but rather a targeted individual surrounded by a network of conflicting interests. These interests were not rooted in his health or well-being, but in the colossal financial infrastructure built around his name. With multi-million-dollar ventures tied directly to his performance abilities, including the upcoming This Is It concert series slated to be a massive financial revitalization for many stakeholders, Jackson was under excruciating pressure to deliver. Behind closed doors, powerful entities were strategizing, calculating, and ultimately cornering a man who had been trying for years to regain creative and personal control over his life. What investigators have unearthed shows that Jackson's medical environment had transformed into a dangerous echo chamber. Multiple physicians, nutritionists, and so-called health experts were ushered in and out of his life at the behest of business associates and handlers, each promising to fix a different issue, each quietly enabling the next. Some were complicit in perpetuating his dependency on prescription medication. Others simply looked the other way, choosing to protect their roles rather than protect the man. The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that Michael Jackson was surrounded not by friends or confidants, but by individuals who saw him as a means to an end. Perhaps the most chilling discovery is the degree to which Jackson tried to escape this cycle. He reportedly expressed concerns about his safety, about being manipulated, about being isolated. He took steps to change his medical team, reevaluate his contracts, and shield his children from what he described as a deeply toxic environment. But his efforts were always met with resistance. What began as gentle persuasion from advisors grew into full-blown control tactics. His phone was monitored, his movements watched, his staff tightly curated. The very people who claimed to protect him were in fact constructing the walls of his invisible prison. Key documentation reveals that Jackson's deteriorating physical and psychological condition in his final months was no accident. His access to proper rest, balanced nutrition, and mental health support was constantly undermined by a rigorous rehearsal schedule and the looming financial threats should he back out of his commitments. Every sign of fatigue was met with pharmaceutical solutions rather than humane alternatives. This wasn't healthcare. It was medical management weaponized for profitability. And in that final moment when Jackson's body finally gave out under the strain, it was not an unpredictable accident. It was the end result of a systematic breakdown, a chain reaction ignited long before he ever checked into his last rehearsal. The implications of this are staggering. It reframes Jackson's death not as a tragic one-off, but as the inevitable endpoint of a manufactured trajectory. The myth of a fragile superstar too dependent on medication to survive begins to crumble when faced with evidence that much of his fragility was exacerbated, if not outright engineered, by those seeking to maintain control. What the world saw was a man who had become erratic and reclusive, What the truth reveals is a man fighting for his autonomy, drowning in a sea of manipulation. At the center of the storm was the This Is It tour, a 50-show endeavor that would have pushed even the healthiest performer to their limits. But Jackson was not in peak form. Despite warnings from his own body and signs that his health was faltering, the tour was barreling ahead. Promoters, investors, and advisors had too much riding on his return. Cancellations were not an option. The contracts were ironclad, and the penalties for default were astronomical. So every possible measure was taken to ensure Jackson was compliant. And when his body resisted, the solution was always another injection, another pill, another sedative. There was no room for empathy, only performance metrics. The pieces of this puzzle come from recently surfaced internal communications and depositions that show a pattern of intentional neglect. Individuals with the authority to step in, to slow things down or offer Jackson a reprieve, instead chose to downplay his suffering. They manipulated his fears, weaponized his trust, and prolonged his exhaustion. As Jackson grew more withdrawn, the narrative was spun to make it seem like his issues were entirely self-inflicted. But the truth tells a different story. He was being steered toward the edge, and those at the wheel knew exactly where they were going. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this revelation is the understanding that Jackson himself sensed it. In his final weeks, he became increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone was trying to harm him. Though many dismissed this as delusional thinking, it now appears that his instincts were painfully accurate. He wasn't imagining the pressure, the manipulation, the danger. He was experiencing it in real time and trying desperately to escape it. This breakthrough forces a reevaluation of not just Jackson's death, but his entire public narrative during his later years. For too long, he was painted as the architect of his own demise, a gifted artist undone by his own eccentricities and dependencies. But that story now feels like a diversion, a smokescreen that allowed the real culprits to remain in the shadows. Jackson's vulnerabilities were real, but they were exploited rather than addressed. His fears were valid, but they were ignored. And ultimately, his life was not lost to a single bad decision, but to a prolonged campaign of dehumanization cloaked in the language of business and care. The revelation does more than solve a mystery. It indicts an entire system that failed to protect a man it claimed to revere. Jackson's fame, influence, and talent should have been a shield. Instead, they became leverage. The more he tried to reclaim control, the more resistance he faced. His attempts at independence were perceived as threats. His cries for help reinterpreted as instability. This is not just the story of a pop icon's final days. It is a sobering indictment of how industries built around entertainment can slowly, methodically destroy the very people who make them thrive. One cannot hear these facts without being moved by the bitter irony that a man who brought so much joy to the world died under such joyless circumstances, that someone who shaped the culture of an entire generation was ultimately silenced by the machinery of that same culture. His music broke records, his dance moves changed the art form, and his vision pushed boundaries. But behind the glittering curtain, Jackson was battling forces far darker than anyone realized. This truth recontextualizes every piece of media, every image, and every story we've seen of Jackson since the late 90s. His reclusiveness, his eccentricities, his shifting appearance, all take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of someone trapped in a system that refused to release him. He wasn't hiding from the world, he was hiding from the people trying to control it. The gloves, the mask, the bodyguards, these weren't quirks of a delusional celebrity. They were shields of a man under siege. Understanding this now doesn't just bring closure. It brings urgency. Urgency to scrutinize the systems we build around fame. Urgency to question the unchecked power of those who manage, advise, and profit from talent. And urgency to create safeguards that protect the humanity of artists, not just their productivity. Because if Michael Jackson, with all his fame and fortune, could be swallowed by the very machine he helped create, then anyone could be. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a documented, evidenced unraveling of a long-hidden truth. What was once whispered behind closed doors is now printed in black and white. Michael Jackson didn't simply die. He was destroyed, not in an instant, but piece by piece, over years of strategic neglect and emotional erosion. As this information comes to light, the shock isn't just in the specifics, but in the clarity it brings. It feels like watching a puzzle fall into place, every piece damning, every corner sharpened by hindsight. This isn't a story with a neat ending. There is no resolution that can bring Michael Jackson back, no justice that can undo the damage. But there is understanding. And with that understanding comes the power to ensure this kind of tragedy doesn't happen again. What remains now is a legacy complicated by truth. Michael Jackson's artistry, his influence, and his spirit endure, but so too must the truth of what happened to him. Not as a cautionary tale of excess, but as a warning against complicity. As this once enigmatic death finally reveals its true shape, the world is left to reckon not just with what was lost, but with how it was taken. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the mystery being solved? What do you expect happened? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.